e ka mana, e ka reo, e ka haue wha tihei mauriora. Tuatahi ki ka atua, ko papatua nuku, ko rakinui, tēnā kōrua. Ki tēnei whare e whakahaumaru ana i a mātou, tēnā koe. Ki ngā tangata e mātakitaki ana, a e noho ki tēnei ruma, tēnā koutou. Ki a kōrua, ko Rach, ko Kim, tēnā kōrua. Ko Waio, ko aoraki te maunga i ahuri nei taku ngākau. Ko whanganui a tāra tōku tino moana, no kotirana oku tipuna, ko gan tōku iwi kotirana. No poriroa hau, kei kopitai tōku kāinga anai nei. Ko Alex tōku ingoa, e mahi ana au ki konei ki te kura ākau tai toka, the University of Otago College of Education. Ka mihi mō te tauhou Māori, nau mai ki tēnei wānaka, ki tēnei kōrero, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Well, welcome everybody to this CALT Kōrero session where Rachel Martin and Kim Brown are in conversation with us about their recent research visibilising student voice and decolonising education at Otago. I'd like to give Rachel and Kim an opportunity to introduce themselves before we get into the substantive discussion this afternoon. So Rachel, tēnā koe iho.
Kia ora iho. Kia ora koutou katoa. He mihi mai o hā kia koutou. Ko Waio, ko Pukekura te Mauka, ko o tākou te moana, ko o tākou te marae, ko Kaitarua rua hiki hiki te hapu, ko Kaitahu kāti mā moe waitaha oku iwi, e noho ana hau ki o tākou hoki, e pukeka hau ki te kura ako taitoka, ko Rachel Martin tō hoku i koa.
Kia ora. Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Cairngorms te muka, ko grade 2s te awa. No Ikeraki, ko te rana, e airana oku tipuna. Ko St. Neots, te whenua tupu. Ke te noho au ki te roto Pātiki, ko Kim Brown tuku koa, he pukeka matua au i te kura ako taitoka. Nō reira, tēnā tātou katoa.
Ka mihi kia kōrua. So just by way of introduction and letting people know what we're going to be doing this afternoon, I'll just explain a little bit about this CALT Kōrero. We three are going to be talking a little bit about the research project and its potential implications for university teaching, for our learning spaces, our architectures, our relationships with each other. There's also a few reflective questions that you would have come across when you were registering for the session today. And so later on we will have some time for Q&A to reflect on those questions or to respond to anything that might come up, both from here in the room and for people who are watching online. There's also a QR code in the room, and later there'll be a link to a QR poll set in the Zoom chat. There's a question that Kim and Rachel have asked us to contemplate today. They are wanting to know how we might be feeling about the prospect of decolonising or re-indigenising education at Otago. So at some point in the discussion, I'll ask the folk behind the scenes to make that QR code live, and then we'll keep talking and you can get on there and give us some of your thoughts. So by way of getting started then, I'd really like to just hear in general about the project, and so I think if you answer in turn that'd be useful. So Kim, I'd like to know, what was the project and how did you come to it?
So Rachel, and in fact all three of us, teach on education studies papers at Te Kura Ako Taitoka, and in those ways that the greatest thoughts happen in the kitchen. We were having a chat one day about our respective papers. I was working on lecturing a paper on global citizenship education, and Rachel Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and we were talking about conversations in the classroom focused on decolonisation and how inspired students were in their conversations when given the opportunity to talk about matters that they see, feel, hear. So Rachel, I'll hand over.
And then we were having what I call them the kapu tea conversations, and we're talking about with the Te Tiriti or Waitangi course that I teach about education at the college, and we saw some synergies across what we were doing, and some of the aspects that I were talking about could be included in Kim's, and we ended up talking about decolonisation in our process too, because if you're looking at Te Tiriti or Waitangi, and if we're looking at aspects where we're thinking, well, what does partnership and relationships look like, then how do we decolonise ourselves first to get to that thinking and that feeling about what that would look like in action. And so but then we decided, well, that would be also a great course, wouldn't it, where you combined what we were talking about as well. So that's how it kind of started, and then we made the application, didn't we?
Great. So so you work with students. Can you tell me what your research question was, and what did you actually do with the student participants?
Okay. So the research question, apologies to people watching. In what ways do students experience a higher education that is respectful of Te Tiriti o Waitangi and mana whenua relationships and partnerships at Ōtākau? And so we took, we were inspired by He Puapua, which Rachel will talk about later in the Kōrero, which is a power sharing approach to working. And taking that, we drew from Kōpapa Māori. So we took a wānaka approach, seeing our interactions with students in a wānaka space, a space for thinking, for sharing, for debate, discussion. And we also drew from photo mapping, so that's a participatory action approach. And we used Instagram for that platform. And so we had also a colleague who is no longer at Ōtākau, Dr. Yasmin Abdul Aziz. So ka mihi nui kia koe, Yasmin. She's now working at the University of Toronto. She joined our team as a research fellow, assistant research fellow, and she was our bridge between ourselves and students across the university. Initially, we were thinking that our project would work with education studies students because they come from all departments. But word on the Kōrero Vine got out that this project was going ahead, and Yasmin was receiving inquiries from people all over the show. So we went back to CALT and ethics and asked to broaden our participant range, which they were happy to do. And Rachel, do you want to take on?
Yeah, no, we got about 68, thank you, students from across all the different departments in the university. And the group we got, gosh, they would be wonderful to teach. Had some amazing, they were obviously there because they're interested in that topic, and they were interested in being there because of the experiences that they had at this university. So that's why I think it made it quite exciting for us to find out and talk about their results, I would say.
And I'd like to come to what you've learned soon, but I think the elephant in the room, first of all, we're talking about decolonisation, but it's a big question, right?
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you can give me your elevator pitch about what you think decolonisation is, or how you make sense of this idea of decolonising.
Okay, so what started our conversations was that I was using some work by George Seferdey, a Ghanaian Indigenous scholar whose research has looked at specifically the higher education environment. And so that perspective sees decolonisation as dismantling structures and systems which maintain power, privilege, value in particular knowledge systems and in particular hands. It also questions the whole notion of personhood, and how certain bodily forms, certain impairments and disabilities became less than human, and so it's a very inclusive approach to thinking about the world we're in addition to ethnicity, culture, linguistics. So it's the broader sense, and that's where our conversations and the synergies overlap. So Rachel.
Just adding to that, so my influence is from Wana Jackson, and he is now passed, but just wonderful speaker. You know, the ability to walk down the road and think what you're going to say and have your themes and all sorted from going on a walk is incredible. For the rest of us have to write things down. But from Moana's perspective, it's looking at re-Māorification in that sense, so putting Māori back into the space. So if you're going to say decolonise something, then you're actually centering colonisation itself again. Or the Western European perspective goes into the centre, instead of it being about, well, what is it that the Te Tiriti or Waitangi wanted us to know, or why was it put in place? And that's because this has become a colonised space. So we're trying to put Māori back into the centre and enabling us to be reclaiming the right to govern ourselves in our own land. So the Rakatira Taka aspect of decolonisation is really important for me. So it's not just a space about looking at what we do here, but what we do for Māori in this space too. And that's, did you want me to go to the pai?
Pai tata?
Yes.
Or he puapua?
He puapua.
He puapua.
Do you want me to talk about that? Because Kim mentioned he puapua, and our lovely Jacinta Ruru had input into this particular document, and so does a few others. And it was talking about, if I'm talking about the rangatira taka space, well, that is a sphere at the moment that is very small. So if we're wanting a joint sphere, which is where the Te Tiriti or Waitangi or the re-Māorification of the space is, that where we joint and work together in a partnership space, is still very, very small. And then you look at the kāwanatanga space, or kāwanataka space, is huge. Okay, that's kind of governing us. So that's where we are at the moment. So to change that space and what that looks like, so that you would have the rangatiratanga sphere, you'd have that beautiful middle sphere we're working all together, and the government sphere, so it's equitable across. So I think about colonisation, decolonisation is reimagining that space, reimagining what it would look like for us and how it could work. And Moana Jackson's done a lot of work in that space, which is I find really interesting, about what it would look like, sound like, feel like if we change that space.
Aye. And that space is the shared space in the middle.
Yeah.
Rach, can you just take me back? You used the term re-Māorification, and I'd written a note to myself about re-indigenising. So re-Māorification, re-indigenising is kind of the same idea?
Yes, similar. But it's, if you say Māorification, if you're adding it onto the re-indigenisation, then the focus is on Māori and centering us again in that space.
Okay,
so it's not just about working with non-Māori to bring ourselves up into that space. Māori have actually been colonised as well. So we've got our own work to do. We're looking at ourselves, and so we need our space where we can uplift what we are doing. Because at the moment, if I think of my own rūnaka, for us, and in education itself, we've got a new curriculum that's coming out that is asking for hapu and iwi to be involved. But at the moment, we've got our own whānau members that don't actually have access to that information within our own hapu. So re-Māorification would be us looking at ourselves first and assisting our own whānau members to have all of this information, etc., so they can be comfortable rather than someone else telling them when they're in an education space. So we've got it's kind of works in with the re-indigenisation, but Māorification for us too.
So I think I hear what you're saying is that there's work here for tangata tiriti in terms of decolonising. So I might have some work to do as a Pākehā New Zealander. And there's work for tangata whenua, and then over time there might be work for us in partnership.
Yep.
And Professor Wally Penetito calls it as a, Levi Strauss actually, 1 + 1 = 3. Because we need to strengthen ourselves first. So I'd agree with that.
Ka pai. Okay, so now to bring these ideas back to your project.
Yes.
So what did your student participants say to you about their experiences here at Otago and the promise, I'm saying promise, of decolonising?
Well, I mean, it was voluntary participation, so, in recognition that we may have attracted students who are asking for more.
Right.
And what they were reflecting on, so we gave them a provocation frame based on the work of George Seferdey and including aspects for students to consider about takata whenua and mana whenua as well. And so when we worked with students, we found that there were aspects of their knowledge where and their experiences where they felt strong. They felt strong in recognising examples of ōretitaka, so Article 3, equity, or seeing a lack of ōretitaka and equity. They felt strongly about having their identities validated within this space and not always experiencing that. But they also experienced positive, knowledgeable teaching and learning, and I think, Rachel, you were wanting to talk a bit more about that.
I was, when you said ōretitaka, I was thinking about equity. And so we're talking about inclusive education here and getting rid of lots of isms, genderisms for a start, and students seeing themselves in our curriculum that we teach.
Yeah.
The other thing I was thinking about, Kim, when you were mentioning that, is the words mana whenua and takata whenua. Some of our students didn't actually know what that meant, so they had a little bit of trouble answering that question because that's not part of our curriculum here across the university.
And we know that because they wrote that down in their notes, or
and told us,
it was in their recordings.
Yes, and we listened because they were doing group work, and so we could walk around the room and hear what they were saying. But and the microphone picked up a lot of their conversations, which kind of led us to think, well, that's not part of this place yet. And if we think about, are we going to talk about the difference between place and space?
We will get
down there. I'll leave that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that students remarked on across, we worked with students across 3 wānaka. So one was a Zoom wānaka and 2 were on campus. And consistent across all 3 were that students do encounter educators, academics who are they feel are doing this work, decolonising, attempting to honour mātua rako Māori, but they felt that this was often in smaller papers.
Thank you,
that not many students took and not many students attended, even though they signed up for it. And so, and they did also remark on the Tikanga Māori Week, or the Te Reo
Māori
Week. And they felt that there was some tokenism. Another problem that students identified was sometimes their educators, be it a tutor, a teaching fellow, they didn't specify, or a lecturer, might talk about cultural competence, but then not demonstrate it. Almost sometimes in the same session.
Right.
So they saw contradictions, but they also saw what they felt was decolonising and attempts to re-indigenise their education.
Yeah, and there was a concern that where papers were available that did have that content, that there were very small numbers of students attending those. So there was a concern that students could graduate from here without learning anything about that type of information.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean. They would have been a great class to work with.
Yeah, I mean, somebody made a comment that we're fearful that we'll leave here in exactly the same place as when we arrived. when it came to
sobering.
Really heartening
decolonising knowledge and mātaurako Māori. And
yeah.
Aye. Because I guess we're all, well, we're in the education profession.
Yes.
We are beholden to a set of professional standards and a code of professional responsibility that really centre Te Tiriti Waitangi.
Yeah.
So I guess we're all trying to work on ourselves as members of the teaching profession in that way. So more and more people are talking about this in everyday life. So I guess there's a expectation on the part of the students coming through that they will be able to engage with us around these kinds of questions, right?
Aye.
And that brings, we're bringing out something out, that is sometimes these conversations are difficult to have.
Oh, aye, absolutely.
And so people avoid having difficult conversation type content in their teaching, because I mean that's skill set that we need to have, perhaps, you know, training in or something, is that it's okay to have those kinds of hard questions being asked and not shut down. Our students want those kinds of conversations. They were telling us in their feedback as well that that's really how do they learn these things? How do they change their thinking or develop in their critical thinking and critical reading in their courses if they can't discuss these kinds of things? And people aren't afraid. It's kind of scary work, but we need to go there.
Yeah, kapai. Well, I guess having listened to some of the research data from the students, now seems a good time maybe to open that QR code and to post that link to the QR code poll question in the Zoom chat. So the question that Kim and Rachel have asked us to think about is, how do we feel about decolonising and re-indigenising our places and spaces at this university? For those of you who are tuned in, let's hear from you. We'll come back and look at the poll in a few minutes.
Yep.
And so put some thought into that question if you would, and we'll keep on talking. One of the things we wanted to talk about today was this idea of place and space. And I think, Kim, you've got something to say to us about this in terms of the university and decolonising place and space. So can you start by telling us what you mean by that and then get into it?
Yeah, they are tricky concepts, place and space. Right. And the photo mapping part of our research asked students to capture in photos examples around the university where they could see decolonisation in action, or colonisation. And students felt very comfortable about place. You know, the physical, architectural place of the university, and it did have cultural narratives of this place, although some aspects of the cultural narratives were not necessarily reflective of mana whenua, mātaurako mana whenua. So there were some differences in their cultural narratives. But it became apparent that perhaps what we were asking with the photo mapping wasn't entirely clear, especially when we think about the space of their education, what they feel, see, hear, do, how they act, how they see themselves validated within this place that we call a site of education.
Okay.
And so we talked about putting provocations onto Instagram to assist people's thoughts. And one of the provocations is on the screen around the questions about your reading list. Because a reading list is a space of knowledge, and it's not neutral. And so we put these questions up. We developed the questions that are quite common critical literacy questions. And we put them up and put it onto Instagram, and then we got students sending us things they were reading, things that they felt reflected diverse authors, or things that they felt were platforming te ao Māori and te ao Māori, mātaurako Māori perspectives, and things that weren't. And so this kind of provocation seemed to work well for that photo mapping aspect of our research. And again, helped us to, feel hopeful that there are colleagues who are doing a lot of mahi in this space.
Oh, so what kinds of things did you learn from the students?
I just want to talk about the place in the space.
Yep.
No, sorry, go Rachel.
If that's all right there.
That's fine.
So if we're talking in terms of colonisation, when we think about a space, it's like a blank canvas. So you come in, there's no history, there's no put onto the land or thinking about this place as with its cultural narratives or the people that live here already. So I think, we're not a blank canvas, and I think that's the biggest difference between a place and a space. And so I think Kim, you did a great job of showing Awhio and our river, which were in this building actually, and how that has changed over time. And when we've got another beautiful Logan Park just down the road there, and we've got another awa that goes under the ground, so the place has been changed. So it's about putting back our takata whenua stories and our students knowing about this place. So if we look at the clock tower, which is an interesting one, we've got students that thought that was built by our Taranaki prisoners that were kept here, but the land underneath was prepared and things like that. So we've got histories about this place which our students don't know about yet. And so it's about, for me, it's about putting those stories so that it becomes a place and not just a space where our students know the takata whenua taka of this area and this place, and who is mana whenua and who are the iwi that input into this rohe. And at the moment, many of the students were unable to do that. So we do have a little bit of work.
I think I'd struggled to do some of that too. I've been absolutely.
Yeah. So. So what was our other?
So what did we learn from?
Yeah, that's right. What did you have anything to share with us about what you might have learned from their reflections and photos?
So students want to graduate from Otago as global citizens who have critical perspective and a sense of giving back, and that's what they want to be fostered within them during their time here, whether it's 3 years, whether it's longer.
But to be global, they need to know where they are.
Yes, exactly.
First. Right, yeah, like this, yeah.
And they also, and place-based and problem-based. So hence why the difficult conversations, having that information. And they wanted, we've talked about the difficult conversations, but if we all talk about they want conversations about racial assumptions, stereotypes, discrimination, bias, tokenism, gender, white privilege, what does that mean?
And they did see that in some of their academics and educators, and they saw that amongst themselves as well.
But in an ad hoc kind of way.
Ad hoc. But they felt within the student community they also experienced discrimination and a greater need for cultural awareness, cultural responsiveness, ethical behaviour too. So, as a place of education, we have a lot of mahi to do, but there are people out there already doing it. And interestingly, some of the, what they're asking for, problem-based learning, place-based learning, future-focused learning, for us from an education field, those practices, those philosophies have been around for a very long time. So they're not asking for a reinvention of the wheel. And that gives us some hope, because we can look back to what has been done, which is high quality work that respects all involved in the learning process, and it exists.
And very cleverly wanted us to expand our views of what who an educator is. So that may mean that you've got people from the community that come in. We're not just the educators here, because we have a philosophy at this university about creating critical thinkers, etc. But those critical thinkers are also out in our community, and so we need to demystify the role of our community as part of the university.
And community is integral to place-based, problem-based learning.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Well, I'm sitting here, my mind's whirling in terms of what could someone like me who works in the university, teaches students, works in education studies, what these ideas might mean for me, and what energy or new energy I could put into my teaching. So I guess I'm pretty keen to hear what do you think this CALT study might contribute to our thinking around advancing learning and teaching.
Well, first I'd like to congratulate you on your use of Te Reo Māori, because for me the key part of what does it mean for us is, as educators, is actually using and our students seeing Te Reo Māori being used, and I think that's something that you've worked on over time. It's not a quick fix, but it's actually students seeing us progress with our use of Te Reo Māori and across spaces, not just in our classrooms, but in wherever we are, wherever they meet. So for me, it's looking at our cultural markers across the university and our cultural markers in our own course content. And so it's moving beyond like bilingual headings, but it's actually what Reo Māori do we use in our sessions in any curriculum area. And I'm talking even languages, etc. So cultural narratives. So for us, mātauraka Māori is the key word that Kim used earlier on. So what Māori content is in every single session that we teach, and not just the Māori week as we called it before. So the integrated curriculum and integrated nature of our curriculum, and we know that our students are coming to university very soon. We've got a brand new curriculum being created, and it's called Te Mātai Aho. So how are we including that information that our students are going to be coming in with? How are we including our fluent speakers of Te Reo Māori in our whole university environment? How are we catering for the diverse needs of our students? So if we're going to decolonise that space, we're going to see more te tiriti or waitangi articles, application of our articles, so that we know what to do and we are ready for our students that are coming from our new educational environments.
Yeah, I think that's quite a good pointer for me in terms of thinking about te tiriti principles. As soon as you start talking mātauranga Māori, mātauraka Māori, I'm trying to kaitahu my reo.
Yes.
So as soon as we start talking mātauraka Māori, this is where it gets a bit difficult for me as tangata tiriti, right? Because I don't want to appropriate knowledges that aren't mine to appropriate, but they kind of are, because I am tangata tiriti and I've lived here forever. So, I think maybe starting big at that principle level might feel like a safer way to proceed. And I know that in the education system all told, where Te Mātai Aho is rolling out, this is a big question around the place of mātauraka Māori and how we upskill our teachers early childhood through primary and secondary schooling, let alone here in tertiary studies, right? So I think I thank you for coming to Te Tiriti principles there, probably to elevate my thinking, deal with my anxiety a little bit about recolonising that which I need not to.
And that's where that's probably why we asked everybody the question about how do you feel about this, implementing this, because it is very scary.
Let's have a look.
Yeah,
Let's have a look. Let's have a look and see how people are responding.
Yes, because you just remembered that. Because
I think we'll get the people behind the scenes might be able to put something up on the screen. Okay, so I guess let's have a look at some of those responses. Kim and Rachel, what sense can you see? What sense can you make here? Obligations, expectations.
And I'm looking at international staff. Embrace, there's, for those who wish to learn Reo Māori and Panelfield University in Eastern Courage, I know that I can speak from College of Education. I know that we feel that's really important, so we have a course that fits in, people work in pairs, it fits in with their working day. So often we're really busy, as you know, as educators. We don't often have time to go to that extra course at the weekend or at night. So I know that with Paitata that we've been thinking about what does this look like. Then what I was going to suggest that classes that are available at different times for Reo Māori, and also for staff as soon as you come in to this university, then what a framework that says if we're going to be te tiriti led, then new staff coming into this environment need to know what that might be or what that might look like.
And for me, this question here about how can we help people who are coming in with no support and guidance, I really want to put on the table what is it, the notion of tangata tiriti, tangata whenua relations, and really to think about what it means to be tangata tiriti. I mean, this is 3 years ago I would never have talked about that as a identity category, as a way to think about partnership. So I think we could do a lot of work there, that's for sure.
Yeah. And I'm loving that we're down the bottom there. I can see, I'm talking about the feeling, exciting. All right. So for me, if we're looking at, it's got to be hopeful. So it can be quite disheartening in a sense sometimes if you don't have that sense of hope or ways of working. Proud is another one. I'm looking at the emotions there as well. And even our emotions have been colonised. Yeah. So we're taught to be happy, and I did some research, and it's our education fault really that we've been teaching students about well-being and feeling okay all the time, but we haven't been talking about the hard stuff and the valid emotions of anger and feeling upset and despair, and which colonisation has caused a lot of that trauma, we should say.
Something I'm reading in some of these comments. It is there's sort of, I guess, a sense of isolation, and I think there is the ways for it are collective. And I think that when we do need to look at our professional development, perhaps we need to look outside of the university to take models from elsewhere, such as communities of learners as a professional development model, as opposed to the one-off workshop or the three hours of the introduction to Te Tiriti o Waitangi, which is meant with the best intentions but will not turn you into a...
Imagine if you could just wānaka, if there was just a space that was just forever and ongoing, and when I came across it, oh crikey, I don't know what to do in this situation, that there was a group, a place, a space where we could just have that conversation on an as-needed basis, just-in-time learning, right? You need it when you need it, and so,
And I think that would help with being brave. That's another way of looking at this sort of information to take that step. And once you have those conversations, it can give you a sense of belonging, a sense of togetherness, and that kotahitanga kotahitaka where you are learning and in this together, it makes you do more, I think.
I'm thinking, you asked the students in your study a question like this: how does decolonisation make you feel, or re-indigenising? Can you see any kind of connection between what the people who are watching are saying and what your students said to you?
Can see the same compulsion to learn.
Yeah, me too.
Because that's for me, that's really reassuring, and not wanting to diminish the sense of frustration that other colleagues here are feeling, but also that people feel this need to learn. And that's what we got from the students.
And I'm loving the sense of urgency
Yep.
with this as well.
Yep.
But also now we've got a framework where that can be actioned. So the university's kind of at
Through-
that stage now where we,
Paitata.
yes,
Paitata,
through,
yeah.
and Vision 2040
Vision
as
2040,
well.
aye.
There's kind of our documents are now giving us a framework. We didn't have that before, but now we have, but it's the actioning and the way with that, well, it's going to be perhaps the hard stuff. So I'm just going to read out a couple of emotions
and
so
then I've
you
got
can
one
get a
more
feeling
question.
of what they had. So hopeful, uplifted, appreciative, discomfort, disappointed, frustration, sadness, happy, validated, and valued and excited. So yeah, that's why I picked out some of those words that we could see. So our students are feeling a little bit like some of you are feeling, which is lovely to be able to see. And I'm just going to, a student said, it's good that we have this study which shows strong presence of colonisation that affects and harms Māori, Pacifica, LGBTQ+, and other groups need to have other advocacy and structures which dismantles these discriminatory structures, which is awesome, isn't it?
Aye, that's a
Right?
provocation.
So they're wanting those conversations so they can unpack it, so they can notice it. I think noticing is a very good behaviour to have as well, because if it's habitual, you often don't notice
Yep.
what's around.
It seems to me that a big part of the decolonising, re-indigenising kaupapa is about partnership. And I know Paitata is advocating partnership approaches to research with mana whenua. So what did you learn about doing partnership-based research through this project that might help inform that vision?
Well, I mean, we worked in partnership from the offset, and it was about us having quite honest conversations with one another. If we felt something needed to be also advanced, having that and having those conversations and justifying, it was actually quite straightforward for us, because I think we come from an environment where you work as a team.
Aye.
We approached it with a sense of humility that we have both got things to gain from this process. And so I think honesty,
Aye.
humility, and constant kōrero.
Aye.
You cannot underestimate how valuable a quick conversation can be.
Cup of tea and lunch.
Yeah.
You can have those conversations that you were saying that we often miss out on because we're too busy. So it's making those times available, because that's where the huge learning can happen, and you can say it in a safe space. So for me, one of our key ideas was a wānaka approach, that this is a safe place for you to express, as part of Māori values, how you're feeling without being afraid that you're going to do something wrong.
Yep.
So if we look...
We were blown away at
yeah.
how much students told one another as strangers.
Oh, yeah.
You know, given that we invited students into the research, and we started with a short mihi,
Aye.
and then
Into the wānaka.
karakia kai, and the karakia, and then the kai and sharing of kai
So I
just
see.
put them at ease. And they'd already grouped themselves, so not with people they knew, people they'd never met, and they were having these very personal, very emotional conversations, and a willingness to be open with one another. And we feel an enormous amount of responsibility from hearing their voices, creating this with the team, creating this audience for their voices, and now our responsibility is to enact.
Aye. Hence something like this, the CALT Kōrero ne? Aye. But it is a long-term project,
It is.
of course. And I think there's a slide here, Rachel,
There
that you were
is.
going to
Let's have
talk
a look
about,
at
which
it.
kind of
So,
brings it into reality.
Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah.
it's kind of like when we're talking about all these emotions, so that we need to validate our ones that are feeling uncomfortable feelings. And can we talk about a pedagogy of discomfort? There's a lot of information, and it's a good thing. So we have to prepare ourselves for that. And it's not a quick fix, hence why I was looking at that long-term, time-wise. It's not something that's going to be an instant action it's an action over time perhaps. And if you're looking at that screen there, you've got to have a little bit of comfort with, I love that bit, uncertainty. You've got to have discernment and patience, and a little bit of humour doesn't go amiss about the ups and downs that we will have in this journey and when we decolonise this space. I know that as a Māori academic member, that when we bring out documents like paitata, etc., or changes in names, that we're sent an email saying if there's any discomfort or any concerns that are affecting you through conversations that are had around this university, please make contact, because we take this seriously. So yeah, as Māori, we do take this seriously, as these are the way we need to move forward. So in that sense of that partnership, it would be quite nice on that journey to not have to have that statement being said to us. That is just part of the usual way we move forward and work together. Not something unusual or different, but just the way who we are. So for that to happen, you've got to have stamina. You've got to not be overwhelmed, but maintain that excitement for the seeking of success, and know that change can happen, because when it stays the same, it's not exciting.
And I think we talked about this before the Kōrero today, and it's about anticipating that we might not see the end of the journey.
No.
Because, as we move forwards as a motu, what decolonisation, re-Māorification, re-indigenisation will look like will evolve. And, it's accepting that it, for our careers, and thus far I have endeavoured to be a critical pedagogist for my whole teaching career.
Right.
And I'm still not there.
Right.
And it's about constantly reflecting and evaluating and having those difficult conversations about your own practice, and then having them amongst the Kōrero, the students in your class.
Right. Pai tēnā. Well, Kim, Rachel, thanks for bringing this CALT Kōrero to fruition. I think it's probably time for a bit of Q&A.
Yeah.
I'm sure folk here in the room might want to have some comments and questions, and there are some questions coming in from online as well. So we've got a few minutes to have a bit of a conversation. So we have some runners in the room here with microphones. So please don't, if you've got a question, wait till you get the microphone so that people who are online can hear you. And I guess let's open the floor for discussion.
Great.
Okay, I have a question online, not something I prepared earlier, I promise. So this is about keeping the conversation going. How can interested people keep the kōrero on this topic going beyond this forum, beyond this CALT kōrero?
That is a very good question. I don't do things. I mean, I would flick that over to HEDC actually, because that is part of their role, but not necessarily. I think that there have to be informal collectives that can move this forward, because when you were talking about as and when you need it, sometimes those more informal mechanisms are more nimble. In terms of their organisation.
I think we have enough communication systems within this university that anybody who would like to join that group could put something out there and ask in the staff communications about who would like to come and get together. And I know there's a lovely Reo Māori group that meet.
There's lots of cafes.
And cafes. So why not, like you mentioned this already actually as a solution, a cafe of where you get together and have these kinds of conversations about what to do. But also I like your suggestion there, Kim, because higher education and HEDC, these courses where those kinds of things could be part of the content. I know that there's cultural capability in the pipeline courses that are coming available, and our critique of that was just to make sure that we have our runaka conversations as part of those cultural capability courses. So I think the conversations can continue like that, and I'm sure those conversations will continue, because if we're going to be a Te Tiriti-led university, then you can't avoid that, to me.
And I guess they have to come from multiple directions,
Yeah,
right? So people in courses, but people in programs, but people in departments and in divisions, and so it's got to come from both directions.
And our students are very good at getting together and making their own, societies or whatever groups where they get together themselves. So why can't we do that too?
And I think there needs to be more space for student voice in this. Because it's a fair point, how can we continue this kōrero? But the question is, should we be having this kōrero exclusively as educators and staff without student input as well?
And as a tangata tiriti, that's an awesome way of beginning.
Aye. Sorry, mate, I'm on RSL at the moment.
I know, I'm just looking at you. You don't have to lead that, because that's the other side of the coin, is anybody can, lead. I wasn't, sorry.
Giving you a job.
So, anyone in the room, any questions that anybody would like to put?
Yep.
Kia ora, Richard.
Wait for that microphone.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you very much. Very thought-provoking session from three very wise wahine. Sorry, that sounded slightly sarcastic. It was not meant to be at all. Very sincere. I really, really enjoyed that, and I think we're all grappling with these challenges, and it's so great to hear the student voice come through today. I'm not sure what my question is entirely, but I guess I would like to ask the three of you how you envisage things. If we use the markers of 2030 and 2040 that we've sort of set down as an institution, how do you see things with the lens that we've been looking through today in terms of decolonisation? Maybe you can answer it in terms of how you see your teaching in 2030 or 2040. I like the idea, I think it was Rachel sort of said about, it's not just me being the expert anymore, I'm bringing this person in from the community and they're speaking on this thing. As Kim knows, in my own work, one of my things I will bang on about is half of our research outputs literally have a padlock on them, so that people in the community can't access our work. What does this mean looking ahead into the future? How maybe you can put your rose-tinted spectacles on and answer positively, or be as blunt as you like. But so what does the future look like?
Well, I don't need to put my rose-tinted glasses on, Richard, and I don't need to even envisage 10, 7 or 17 years hence. Although that will be when my moko are here, and I would expect they will have expectations of everybody. But I already work with a colleague. We made a commitment to each other about 3 years ago that we would teach together tangata whenua tangata tiriti. And so, despite the fact that being more of an encumbrance perhaps on workload models and stuff, we actually front up to classes together. We teach side by side. We wānaka mostly our classes. They're smaller, that's easier to do in that particular class. But I've done that here. I did that at University of Canterbury as well, with a Māori colleague in the education department there. And we just did our teaching that way, despite what the institution expected. So I think that's what I'd like to see more of, but we need to have systems in this place to account for that, so that people can feel like they can commit to that kind of partnership approach to teaching. I've benefited from it immensely. It's been extraordinary. Yeah. So that would be my answer.
And I'm probably the same. I actually really enjoy working with someone else, hence working with Kim. And I taught Te Reo Māori at Canterbury University to initial teacher education students there, and we always taught together. And we worked around, like you said, worked around the system. So if the system is not working for you, then you can be creative within the system. So hence that's a start. It would be nice if we didn't have to keep doing that, but I think that's a really good way. I don't know whether it's answering your 10 or 30 years, that's actually a topic that I ask in my course. What will it look like? What does a tītiriti or Waitangi partnership and relationship look like for you, and what would that look like in the future? And because that's not around us, that's actually a really hard question, because they can't envisage that, because we haven't seen it because of colonisation. So actually picturing that is a really tricky thing, and I think that's something that we're going to have to grapple with. For me, it's easy. For me, it's actually rakaterataka, and working towards what the tītiriti or Waitangi partnership should look like. And if I worked towards that, that's we have that in our legislation, then for me, if that's what it was envisaged to be, that's what I'm hoping that teaching will look like. And I do get disappointed if it doesn't. So, yeah.
I mean, this is a resilient model of education. It's been around hundreds of years. And as Rachel says, it is hard to reimagine it. But for me, future-focused education doesn't necessarily take place here, you know, in a room for 50 minutes or an hour and 50. It can take place within the community, but there are, you know, we have to be conscious of capacities within communities, but there is also moving at a pace of partnership rather than the pace of what somebody, the most powerful, wants. So I think it is about moving away from the structures that constrain people, and recognising that there are all people skilled as educators and always have been. You know, we're quite good at reproducing ourselves, but it doesn't need to be that way, and that learning is problem-based, is place-based, and does foster a sense of citizenship, not for self-improvement, but for collective improvement. And that's where I would be going.
As far as runaka involvement, just one word of caution. We are a small number of people who are working incredibly hard. So that's why we need takata actually, to support and do and work with that information and share what we have, but not without engagement with runaka first. So that'll be the key note that I will finish off there.
Tēnā kōrero.
I see we're nearly there.
Aye. Yeah, look, it does look like we're coming to time, so I think we will draw a line under it there. I'd like to thank you both, Rachel and Kim, for your thoughts and your provocations from this research. Thank you to the audiences both here in the room and online for your thoughts and questions, your comments. I'd also like to thank the Committee for Advancement of Learning and Teaching for supporting this CALT Kōrero series, funding your project too, of course.
Yes, thank you.
And as well as the media production unit for their work with us today, getting us ready, and their great job in helping us, helping bring this all together. I think it's only fitting to finish with a whakatauki, because we are in this for the long haul, whānau, so he waka e ke noa, and I think I'll just finish with mā te wā.
Ka mihi nui.